Good evening. My name is Tammy O'Reilly, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming out and supporting such a great cause. Right now, I'd like you to take a journey back in time with me, more than a century, to a time when Forest City was a bustling and booming coal mining town, when trains filled with immigrants arrived almost daily, strangers in a strange land with different customs, different cultures, and, for many, even a different language. Assimilating was not easy for these people, nor was it for the longtime residents of this once peaceful community. Forest City was changing, and with that change came the need for necessities. Businesses seemed to spring up overnight: grocery stores, clothing stores, restaurants and hotels, but seedier places as well: saloons, nightclubs, gambling houses, and pool halls. The victim in this case was an immigrant himself, a man by the name of Jabez Lemon, who ran one of those pool halls and ended up dead on the morning of January 17, 1897. In August of that same year, John Jack Waltz of Forest City was led into the Susquehanna County Courthouse charged with Lemon's murder. The purpose of that session was jury selection, and tonight you will be the jury that sits in judgment of Mr. Waltz. It will be your job to determine the manner of Mr. Lemon's death. Listen to the witnesses, assess their testimony, and weigh the evidence. But most of all, just enjoy the show. Thank you. And I would ask, please, that you turn off your cell phones, or at least silence them. Thank you.
All rise. The Honorable Judge Daniel Cyril presiding.
Please be seated. The court will come to order. In the matter of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus John Jack Waltz, men and women of Susquehanna County, we are gathered here to do our solemn duty to enforce the laws of God, the United States, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Susquehanna County, and the Borough of Forest City. We are faced with a charge of a most grievous offense, the murder of a human being, Jabez Lemon. The Constitution of the United States grants the assumption of innocence to anyone charged with a crime. It is the solemn duty of the jurors to listen closely to every word spoken at this judicial undertaking. You are instructed to put aside anything you heard previously about this case. You must only consider what witnesses say on the stand when questioned by the defense. By the defense and prosecuting attorney. Do not add anything you may have heard about this trial or any opinions or conclusions you may have drawn before being impaneled on this jury. You, the jury, have the singular task to make a judgment on whether what took place on January 17, 1897 was the final act of a man, Jabez Lemon, whose mental faculties were dulled by chronic, intense pain and a feeling of being abandoned by his friends and customers, or if it was a dastardly act by a seemingly false friend, John Jack Waltz, who, wearied of the victim's whinings and undeserved abuse, and hoping to profit from his death, being able to assume ownership of the victim's business. There are only two choices for the jury: our learned and capable legal representatives, Attorney Haney and Attorney Safford, for the defense will strive to bring relevant testimony to the courtroom and serve as fact finders for both state and the accused. A man's life stands in the balance and is in your hands. A conviction could send this man to the gallows for an excruciating death, or his innocence could allow him to continue as a member of your business community. The verdict must be unanimous. All must vote either innocent or guilty. Be advised that this court will exercise a strong hand in determining what the legal counsels can ask, say, or do. The court will act swiftly on any objections registered by either adversary. It will act strongly if any witness strays from answering or evading any legitimate question directed at them. We also warn those in the audience that the court will condone no instances of outbursts or comment of any kind during these proceedings. If they occur, the perpetrator or perpetrators will be escorted from the court by Squire Brayman. The trial of John Jack Walsh will now begin with opening statements by Honorable Prosecutor Aney and Honorable Defense Counsel Stafford. Is the prosecution ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
You are first. Prosecutor Aney, may God bless these proceedings.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Jabez Lemon was a resident of Forest City who ran a successful pool hall on Higgins Street and lived in the back room. On the morning of January 17, 1897, Mr. Lemon was found dead, sitting in a chair in his living quarters with a gunshot wound to the head. The only other person in the room or in the house that night was Mr. Walls, that person sitting right there. Now, Mr. Lemon was in poor health. That much is true. The defense will contend that because of his ill health, that Mr. Lemon committed suicide. But the Commonwealth contends that that is false. This was a cold-blooded and calculated murder. The motive for it was as old as the hills: hatred and greed. Mr. Lemon, because of his illness, was moody and cantankerous, and he often took that anger out on Mr. Walls. Slowly over time, Mr. Walls came to hate him. The Commonwealth will prove that Mr. Lemon's health was actually getting better and that Mr. Walls was not willing to wait for nature to take its course. Instead, he decided to hasten Mr. Lemon's death with a bullet to the head. Listen to the witnesses who take the stand. When you hear their testimony, I have no doubt you will bring back a verdict of guilty in the murder in the first degree. Thank you.
Thank you, Prosecutor Aney. Opening statement by Defense Counsel Stafford.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Jack Walsh is an innocent man. He did not murder Jabez Lemon. As a matter of fact, these two men had been best friends for many years. They even lived together. They shared an apartment. Unfortunately, Jabez Lemon had health issues. He had a hard time breathing. He couldn't lie down to sleep. He had to sit sitting up in his chair. But that wasn't his biggest problem. He suffered excruciating pain from an infection in his leg. And over time, he became despondent and desperate. He had no quality of life whatsoever. He couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't conduct his business affairs. He couldn't breathe. He suffered immensely. So on the night of January the 17th, he made a decision. And that decision was to take his own life. did by committing suicide. And the testimony from that witness stand will prove that Jack Walsh is an innocent man. Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. Let us proceed with witnesses. Mr. Rainey, call your first witness.
Prosecution calls Wilhelmina Higgins.
Ms. Higgins will step forward and be sworn in.
Ms. Higgins lives in the same building as Waltz and Lemon. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
The witness will be seated.
Mrs. Higgins, can you tell the jury what happened on the morning of January 17, 1897?
Yes. About 8 o'clock in the morning, Jack Walsh came to my room and said, "The old man shot himself." I went out and Jenny Stevens was in the hall and we went down to his room. He was sitting in his chair with his head back like a man snoring. When I went in, there was a bullet wound right in his head.
Are you okay, Mrs. Higgins?
Mrs. Higgins, would you like to take a few moments?
Please, just a minute. I went over it and there was some dried blood on his face. And I went to touch the left side of his face and that's when I saw the revolver on the floor. I was gonna pick it up and Jenny said, you better not, you better not do it. We better wait until Squire Brahman gets here. She said, you better go get the squire. So then I left and I went to get the squire. It was awful.
Are you okay, ma'am?
I'm trying.
Now, Mrs. Higgins, did you have a conversation with Mr. Walls on January 16th, 1897? The day before Mr. Lemon died?
Yes. He said to me, if something happens to the old man, meaning Mr. Lemon, he would come and get me. I said, no, don't do that. Because Mr. Lemon and I, we didn't get along. And there was that lawsuit going too.
So on the very day before he died, Mr. Walls was talking about something happening to Mr. Lemon?
Yes, and he said if something happens to Mr. Lemon, he was going to get the pool hall.
Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Does the defense wish to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor, we do.
You may proceed, Mr. Stafford.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Higgins, where did this conversation with Mr. Walsh take place?
We were in Mr. Lemon's apartment.
And where was Mr. Lemon during this conversation?
He was walking around in the back room.
Well, I'm a bit confused. Now, if you didn't want Mr. Walsh to call on you if something happened to Mr. Lemon, then why were you in the apartment the day before when Mr. Lemon was there?
I went to see Mr. Lemon to ask him for his rent. It wasn't due for 2 days, and it was $12, but he said, okay, he'd pay it, and he did.
Okay, so what you're saying is this was a business call, not a social call, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, you also said that when you got to the room on the morning of January the 17th, you saw Mr. Lemon sitting in a chair. Now, can you tell us, how was that chair positioned?
It was facing his cot.
And how much space was there between the cot and the chair?
I don't know.
Well, was there enough room for a person to stand between the chair and the cot?
No, I don't think so.
Now, had Mr. Walsh ever spoken to you before about the possibility of something happening to Mr. Lemon?
Oh, yes, many times.
Yeah. And had Mr. Walsh told you before that if something did happen, he would inherit the pool room?
Yes, that's what he told me.
Yes, but you wanted the jury to believe that the day before he died, when the very first time he had ever said this to you, didn't you?
No,
You were at Mr. Lemon's apartment to collect the rent, is that right?
that's right.
So you own the building that Mr. Lemon lives in?
Yes, I do.
Now, do you make all your tenants pay their rent early, or just Mr. Lemon because there was a lawsuit with him? This lawsuit you had
This
with
was a
Mr.
special circumstance, and I went and asked him for it.
Well, this lawsuit that you had with Mr. Lemon, now what was that pertaining to?
Objection, irrelevant.
Objection sustained. This is not relevant to this case.
Thank you.
You weren't very fond of Mr. Lemon, now were you?
I
You hated him, didn't you?
No, I
You
didn't
hated
like-
him because of this
No,
lawsuit?
I didn't like him.
Yes, you did. Now, would you agree that anger and hatred could be a strong motive for murder?
I don't know.
Yes, but you hated him. You
No,
hated him, and you
I
also
told you I
knew.
didn't like
Yes,
him.
no, you also knew that if something happened to him, Jack would get the pool
Yes,
hall. But
right.
if something turned onto Jack, who would get the pool hall? It's in your building.
Yes, it's in my building.
So then
but
you
it's
would
not
get
my
the pool.
business. No, it's just my building.
You hated him.
No, I told you I didn't like him.
Yes, you did. You didn't like him, but you hated him. And you had
Put
enough
words in
motive.
my mouth.
No, you had enough motive that you wanted him dead.
No.
Now, where were you on that morning? Because
Order in the court. No more, no outbursts.
There'll be nothing
Stafford,
further.
you may proceed.
There'll be nothing further.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, sir. You were so mean.
Mr. Rainey, your next witness.
Prosecution calls Jenny Stevens.
The witness will step forward and be sworn in.
Stevens resides in the same building as Waltz and Lemon, above the pool hall. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Witness will be seated.
Mrs. Stevens, I'd like to direct your attention to Saturday, the day before Mr. Lemon died. Did you hear anything that day?
I did. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was loud, boisterous, yelling, argument going on between Mr. Walsh and Mr. Lemon. I couldn't quite make out their language and hear exactly what they were saying, but it was not a pleasant conversation. Then, later that evening, when we went to bed, I was just beginning to doze off, and I thought I heard Mr. Lemon say, "Stevens, Stevens," in like a panicky voice, like he was calling my husband to come help him, but then there was nothing. It was only the two Stevens.
And when did you first hear that Mr. Lemon died?
Oh, about 8 o'clock on Sunday, Mr. Walsh came to our door and woke us up and said the old man had shot himself. We asked him, well, when did that happen? And he said, oh, about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I said, well, why didn't you come and get us then? And he said, I thought it was a bottle of pop breaking.
And when did you last see Mr. Lemon alive?
Oh, that Saturday night. My husband had made a crutch for Mr. Lemon so that he could get around a little bit better, and it was a little too long for him. So my husband was going down to cut it off a little bit and put a brad on the bottom so it wouldn't slide. But Mr. Walls had already done that.
Did you hear anything else?
Oh, yes. Mr. Walls said, "I wish the old bastard would die."
And who was he referring to?
The defense makes an objection.
The witness should respond.
Mr. Lemon?
Come on, Judge. Objection?
There's an objection before the court. When an objection is raised, you can't answer the question until I rule. Now, did Mr. Walls tell you who he was referring to?
Mr. Lemon?
Judge, please, objection? She doesn't know.
Your objection is sustained.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your witness.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Mrs. Safford?
Thank you, Judge. Now, Mrs. Stevens, you testified that you heard Mr. Walsh and Mr. Lemon talking on January the 16th, but you couldn't quite hear what they were saying. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was this an amiable conversation? Was it pleasant or not?
It was not pleasant.
Well, how do you know that?
Just from the tone of their voices.
Oh, so you assume, but you don't know that this was an argument. Let me ask you, was the pool hall busy at that time?
There were people there, only about 2. Wasn't very noisy.
It wasn't noisy. Now, did you testify at the inquest in this manner?
Yes.
Is there a reason that you didn't testify, that you heard John Walsh say he wished the old man were dead?
I wasn't asked that question.
So no one even bothered to ask you? Unbelievable. But you didn't even bother to volunteer that information either, now did you?
Well, why would I?
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Safford. Mr. Rainey, prosecution, witness.
Prosecution calls Cassie Stanton.
The witness will step forward and be sworn in.
Miss Stanton also lives in the same building as Waltz and Lemon. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Mrs. Stanton, it's a very lovely hat. Very nice fur. I didn't realize the women of Forest City were so well dressed. Ms. Rainey?
Now, Mrs. Stanton.
Pardon me. It's Miss Stanton?
No, Miss Stanton.
Thank you.
Can you please tell the jury, what occurred in the very early morning hours of January 17th?
Yes, I went to bed early that night, but I had trouble falling asleep. So I decided to get up. I guess it was about 12:30, and I went to the window because there was a beautiful full moon that night. And as I was in the window, I heard some running in the alley. Now, I heard some yelling, and I couldn't see anyone, but I did hear Mr. Lemon say, "For God's sake, will you stop following me?" And I heard Mr. Wall say, "Shut up or I am going to kill you."
Shut up or I'll kill you. Shut up or I'll kill you. Now, did you hear anything else that morning?
Well, I did finally fall asleep. And about 3 o'clock, I was awakened by the sound of a gunshot. And then there was movement in the next room. But then I thought, I must be dreaming. Why would a gunshot be going off at 3 o'clock in the morning? So I just went back to sleep because I thought, like I said, I must be dreaming.
Did you ever see Mr. Lemon again after that?
Well, what happened the next morning when I did awake? There was commotion outside my door. Well, I went out in the hall, and there were many people there, and Mr. Lemon's door was open. So I thought, well, I'll go in and see what's going on. Well, I just about fainted when I went in the room. Here was Mr. Lemon sitting in the chair, dead. And what was the worst thing was he had a bullet hole right in his forehead. Why, I'll never get that picture out of my mind. It was awful.
Well, thank you. I want to ask you, how would you characterize the relationship between Mr. Wallace and Mr. Lemon?
Well, not good. I know they were friends, but they did have some heated discussions. And in fact, Mr. Waltz told me just a week ago that he was planning on leaving Lemon and leaving Forest City.
Thank you. Nothing else, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Mr. Safford.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Nice hat, Miss Stanton. You know why Mr. Lemon allowed Mr. Walsh to live with him?
Yes, Jabez needed help. He needed quite a bit of help, both in the pool hall and in his apartment.
So he needed help with the pool hall, and did he also need help, say, with his personal health because of his poor health?
Well, yes, but going back to the pool hall, Mr. Waltz would help him open up, close up. Sometimes he would wait on customers. He was very good in that manner. But when it came to his personal health, why, I know that he would cook for him, make him some meals. He would clean up his place, but most of all, he had to clean up that wound that he had on his leg. You see, Mr. Lemon was injured many years ago, and the wound never really healed. So Mr. Walsh did help him with that. He used to dress that wound for him. So it was very nice of him to take care of him in that manner.
So you're saying that Mr. Walsh did pretty much everything then for Mr. Lemon, is that correct?
Yes, I would say so.
All right. Now you testified that you heard someone running in the alley on the morning of January the 17th. And then you heard Mr. Lemon tell someone to leave him alone, correct?
Yes,
But
that's
you
what I
didn't see
heard.
anyone.
No, I could not see anyone, but I certainly know their voices, and I knew that that's who it was.
And then a little bit later, you said that you heard a gunshot, is that right?
Yes, I believe it was. That's what I said, but again, I thought, well, I might be dreaming.
Yeah, but even if you just thought you were dreaming, didn't that concern you, hearing a gunshot at that time?
Well, I suppose so.
Yeah, but you didn't bother to call the police. You didn't
No, I
call
did not.
anybody. You didn't go and check on him. And Mr.
Well,
Lemon,
I'm
you did
sorry,
nothing,
Mr.
right?
Stafford, I would not go and check on him. Now, I am a single woman living in that building. How would that look if I was to leave my room at 3 o'clock in the morning and go unaccompanied to another man's room at 3 o'clock? Why, the ladies in this building would certainly talk about me because you know there are so many busybodies in that rooming house and the gossips just go on and on.
Well, I have nothing else after that.
Thank you, Mr. Safford. The witness is excused.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Rainey, the witness.
Prosecution calls Squire Braden.
The witness will step forward.
Squire Brayman initially considered Jabez Lemon's death a suicide, but after consideration and an inquest, hearing the testimony, he changed his ruling to murder.
Mr. Barron, you will be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
Squire Braden, are you familiar with the defendant, Mr. Walls?
Yeah, I know Jack Waltz.
Did you see him on January 16th, the day before Mr. Lemon died?
Yeah, I did.
And was he in possession of anything?
Actually, yeah. I saw him in possession of a revolver.
A revolver?
Yep.
Nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Mr. Safford, you wish to cross-examine?
Oh, we certainly do, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Thank you.
That's where it starts to get interesting. Squire Brown, did you ask Mr. Walsh about this gun?
No, I didn't.
Why not? In your position as a squire, didn't it concern you that this man had a gun? As a matter of fact, don't you know other people in town that carry weapons?
No.
Yeah,
That's
but-
not my job.
That's not your job?
No.
So do you have any knowledge to whether or not the gun actually belonged to Mr. Walsh?
No, I had no knowledge of that.
Okay, so you really don't know that then?
No.
Now, you held the inquest in this manner, is that correct?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And at first you determined that this was a suicide, is that right?
Yes. Initially, I determined that.
But initially you believed it was a suicide, right?
Yes. On the word of Jack Walsh, though.
Okay, thank you. There'll be nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Safford.
Judge, I have another question, please.
Mr. Rainey, you may proceed.
Squire Brandon, what made you change your mind?
No, I had a conversation with Dr. Grander, and after the findings of his autopsy, it led me to call for an inquest.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. The witness may step down. Your next witness?
Prosecution calls Dr. F.L. Grander.
Dr. Grander conducted the autopsy of Jabez Lemon.
You may be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yeah, I do.
You may be seated, Doctor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I am certainly interested in that grocery sack that you have with you. I surmise that's not your lunch.
Well, it is not my wife's Wiener Schnitzel, no. You will see soon.
Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Rainey.
Thank you. Dr. Grander, can you tell us the events you participated in on the morning of January 17th and what your findings were?
Yeah. That morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was called to the house. When I got there, Brahman, Higgins, and Stevens were already down. I walked into Mr. Lemon's apartment. He was seated in a chair by his cot. He had bled very little. There was no blood on his hands, and his hands were folded over his chest. At his feet, there was a revolver which looked like bloody finger marks on the barrel. At that point, rigor mortis had already set in. He must have died, like 3 or 4 hours earlier that day. I asked Mr. Valls, I says, what happened? He says, well, I heard a noise about 3:30, but I did not investigate because I thought it was a pot bottle or a beer bottle exploding.
Did you see any powder burns or powder marks on Mr. Lemon?
I did not see any at all, and I looked very carefully.
Now, during the autopsy, did you probe the trajectory of the wound?
No, not at that time, I did not. But I knew that eventually this would have to be done. So on April the 5th, I ordered the body of Mr. Lemon to be exhumed, and I did a more thorough examination.
And did you probe the wound at that time?
Yeah, I did.
And what did you find?
Well, this is the noggin of Mr. Lemon. You can see the bullet hole goes in the front, comes to the back, rebounds off the back, goes to the brain tissue and turns it to mush.
Did you conduct any other experiments?
Yeah, Dr. Knapp and myself, we got a revolver. Same make and model as the one found at the feet of Mr. Lemon. Same type of cartridges. We had 9 pieces of Muslim squares that we shot through.
Are these the squares you're referring to?
Yeah, those are the ones. What we did, we started at 1 foot. We shot through the first square. We moved to 2 feet. We shot through the second square. 3 feet, third square, and so forth and so on, till we shot through all 9 pieces of Muslim.
But yet you saw no powder burns on Mr. Lemon's body after you did that.
There were powder burns on each piece of Muslim, but on his body there were none.
So what did you conclude?
You would have to conclude that the bullet came from at least 10 feet away or more.
And let me ask you, were Mr. Lemon's eyes open or closed when you examined the body?
They were closed.
Considering the position of the body and the fact that Mr. Lemon's eyes were closed, what would you say his condition was when he was shot? Sleeping or awake?
Oh, he was definitely asleep when he was killed.
So in your opinion, would you say Jabez died by his own hand?
I do not think that he could have done that, no.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination by the defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you.
Now, doctor, you said that you used a revolver identical to the one found at Lemon's feet, is that correct?
Yeah?
But it was not the actual weapon that killed Mr. Lemon, right?
No, it was not, because that weapon was not made available to us. But as I said, same make and model, same type of cartridges.
Okay, what about the powder in those cartridges, though? Was it the same powder that was used in the cartridge that killed Mr. Lemon?
This I do not know.
Well, doctor, is it possible for someone to commit suicide with a handgun and not leave powder marks?
I do not believe so, no, sir.
Well, what if they held something between the gun and their face? Say a handkerchief or a piece of clothing or a blanket. Could that have possibly prevented powder marks from showing up?
Well, possibly.
Now, do you know if all the bedding and all the clothing in Mr. Lemon's room was checked for powder marks?
No, I do not.
Okay. But is it possible that if the body was handled improperly, that the powder marks could have been rubbed away?
I do not believe so, no.
But is it possible?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's possible.
Thank you. That'll be all.
Thank you.
The witness may step down. Very interesting testimony, Dr. Rander.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Rainey, another witness.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth rests.
Mr. Safford, Commonwealth rests. Is the defense ready?
Yes, we are, Your Honor.
You may call your first witness.
Thank you. The defense would like to call Colin Cole, please.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. Safford, before we proceed, for the edification of the jury, was Mr. Lemon a foreigner? It seems quite a combination of names, Jabez, Lemon. I know that community is populated by immigrants. Is he a foreigner?
I believe he was, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Cole. Oh, sorry.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Cole, did you know Jabez
I did.
Okay. And how long had you known him?
About 7 years. I was the first person he talked to when he came to Forest City. I often went to his place.
So you like to play pool then, is that right?
I do.
I do too. Now, can you tell us about the last time that you saw him?
It was about 3 days before he died. I went over to his place and Walt's coming at the door. I saw Lemon sitting in his chair and I just knew he was in pain.
Objection as to what the witness knew.
Objection sustained. You must just say what you saw, not what you think. Proceed, Mr. Stafford.
Thank you, Arnie. Now, Mr. Cole, did Mr. Lemon ask you anything on that day?
He did. He asked me if I thought he was going to get better.
So what did you tell him?
I told him that if he had any business, he better attend to it because it's near the end of his halter.
Well, that's kind of harsh, don't you think?
A little bit.
Well, what was Mr. Lemon's response to that?
Well, he didn't say anything at first. Then he sent Mr. Waltz out to get dinner. And he told me if he had to suffer any longer, he put a ball through his head.
So Mr. Lemon told you that he thought about shooting himself in the head to end his suffering. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I told him he wouldn't do it. And he said, yes, I would.
Now, had you ever heard Mr. Lemon speak about suicide before?
I have. He has running sore on his leg, and Dr. Corsano of the Hancock Johnson had practically given up on him. And he had maggots that ran out of his leg, and he told me that if he had suffering long, he put himself out of the way.
And when did he tell you that?
He told me this, it was about a week before he died. Yeah, he told me that.
Okay. Now, what did you understand that to mean?
I mean, if you say you're putting yourself out of the way, it probably means that committing suicide.
Now, Mr. Cole, on that last night that you saw Mr. Lemon, 3 days before his death, did Mr. Walsh come back while you were still there?
He did. And when he came back, Mr. Lemon had said, I don't know what I would have done if it hadn't been for you, Jack Waltz. No one in Forest City could have done for me what you have done.
Would you repeat that, please?
No one in Forest City could have done for me what you have done.
Thank you. There'll be nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Prosecution, cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor, I have a couple of questions.
Proceed.
Mr. Cole, how long did you know Mr. Lemon was ill?
I'm not exactly sure, but I knew it was a long time.
And he had talked about ending his suffering before that, hadn't he?
He had.
And he was known to talk about ending his suffering at all times, wasn't he?
Correct.
Yes, he told many people he was dead, and he said that for years, correct?
Yep.
And that night you were with him, 3 days before his death. Do you think you were very comforting to him?
No, I don't think I was.
Nothing more.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Mr. Stafford, another witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Ann Howard, please.
The witness will step forward.
Ann Howard worked for Lemon from July until September 1896, only months prior to Lemon's death.
The witness will be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You will be seated. Mr. Stafford.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Howard, what were your duties when you worked with Mr. Lemon?
I took care of the pool room and I helped with Mr. Lemon.
But wasn't Mr. Walsh working for Mr. Lemon at that time?
Yes, he was. But Mr. Lemon required a lot of care. He was doctoring with a doctor up in New Milford, which is kind of a far distance away. So when Jack, Mr. Waltz, would take Mr. Lemon up there, I would take care of the pool room.
Now, when you say Mr. Lemon needed a lot of care, can you describe to us what was wrong with the man?
Well, yes, he had a lot of health problems, breathing problems and the like, but the worst was his leg. It was so swollen and infected, he could barely walk. And when that happened, he would have to go up to the doctor and have it scattered.
Scattered, that's not a term I'm familiar with. Could you please explain to the court what scattered means?
Yes, the doctor would cut it open and drain it.
Oh. So now was Mr. Lemon's bad leg the result of some type of injury?
Yes, when he was a younger man, he cut it and injured it badly.
And as I said, it would just swell and fill with pus, and at that time, he would have to go and have it scattered.
Okay. Now, how would you describe Mr. Lemon's disposition?
He was depressed and he was cantankerous. He was always saying he wished he were dead.
Now, would you consider him to be suicidal?
Objection, this woman's not a psychiatrist.
I think Mr. Safford is asking for an opinion and not a clinical diagnosis. So that objection is overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll repeat the question. Would you consider him suicidal, Mrs. Howard?
Yes, I would. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and he would get the notion, he would say, I'd like to blow my brains out.
Thank you. There'll be nothing further.
Prosecution? Cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Howard, you described Mr. Lemon as depressed and cantankerous, correct?
That's it, yes.
That means he could be very difficult, correct?
Oh, at times, yes.
Nasty?
Yes.
And who dealt with Mr. Lemon more, you or Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Walsh did.
Would you agree that caring for him could be frustrating?
Oh, sure.
Did Mr. Walsh get frustrated with Mr. Lemon?
I'm sure he did.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Your Honor, I have a few more questions, if you please.
Mr. Safford,
Thank you.
you may go redirect.
Now, Mrs. Howard, frustrated or not, frustration doesn't necessarily lead to murder. Have you ever seen Mr. Walsh be violent with Mr. Lemon?
No, not really.
Not at all.
Not at all.
So, now would you describe Mr. Lemon as cantankerous?
Yes, I said he was cantankerous. And what I mean like that, he always thought that people were out to get his money. One time, he was involved in that suit with the Higginses. And he said at that time, the first person whose name he saw in the paper, he was going to go out and shoot that man, and then he was going to kill himself. He was always to the point that he thought that somebody was out to get him.
Out to get him? What do you mean?
Well, one night I was out kind of late, and when I came home, he took a shot at me.
He even took a shot at you?
Yes, he did, and he laughed about it.
Oh, so the gun actually belonged to Mr. Lemon then?
Yes.
Oh. What other things did Mr. Lemon say to you? Did he ever mention to you, if he killed himself, how he would go about it?
Well, once I heard him talking to a man, and they were talking about it, and he said, the best way to kill yourself is to shoot yourself in the forehead.
In the forehead, is that right?
Yes, that's
Okay,
what he
thank you,
said.
Mrs. Howard. There'll be nothing further.
Mr. Randy, do you have anything else for this witness?
No further questions, Your Honor.
Witness may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome. Mr. Safford, do you wish to call another witness?
Yes, Your Honor, I certainly do. And at this time, Your Honor, we would like to call the defendant, Mr. John Jack Walls.
The defendant will come to the stand and be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
The defendant will be seated.
Hello, John, how are you doing?
Fine.
Well, that's good to hear. Could you please tell the court how old you are?
I am 47 years old.
And when were you arrested?
Last January.
And you've been confined in the jail since that time, is that right?
I have.
Now, have you ever been in any type of trouble before this?
No, sir.
All right. Now, could you please tell us where you were born?
I was born in Sterling, Wayne County.
And can you possibly give us a brief summary of your life up to the time that you met Mr. Lemon?
Well, I left home when I was 17 and moved to Scranton to work for my brother-in-law in butchering. That's where I met Jabez. I got married in Scranton. Me and my wife had 2 children. My wife got dissatisfied, I suppose, and skipped out. We had a boarder at the time, and she skipped with him.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Now, how long did you stay in Scranton?
After my wife left, I stayed about 5 or 6 years, and then I moved to Carbondale, where I was engaged by Benjamin Gardner.
Okay, can you tell us about Mr. Lemon, please?
He had moved to Carbondale too, and was working for Peterson. We were friends. He was all alone, and so was I. After he got injured at Peterson's, he moved to Forest City and tried bakery. But then he fell and injured his bad leg again. He could no longer run the bakery, so he opened the pool room. That's when he asked me to stay with him, and I offered to do so.
So then you and Mr. Lemon were very good friends for almost 30 years, is that right?
That would sound right.
Okay. Now, how was Mr. Lemon's health?
Oh, it's not good. His injured leg just wouldn't heal. It would swell to twice its normal size and would lose pus. And each night I would have to try and squeeze the pus out before I could wrap it in the rag bandages. It was very painful for Jabez. He would scream all the while I was doing it. And the wound was infested with maggots. They would leap from the rag bandages and skip across the floor. He said to me, "Jack, the bloody maggots are boring a hole in my leg."
Oh God, I don't know how you could have dealt with that.
It's my best friend.
Now, didn't Mr. Lemon seek treatment though from medical doctors of any kind?
Oh yes, he saw many doctors, but they couldn't help him. All they could do was to open the wound when the swelling wouldn't go down. He tried many different remedies. Most recently, Dr. Kurzena had been using herbs to treat him.
Mr. Walsh, do you know that Dr. Corsina is 112 years old?
He claims to be, but I wasn't there when he was born.
But Mr. Walsh, did you kill Jabez Lemon?
No, sir. Jabez was my best friend.
That's a lie. I heard you say you wanted to kill him.
That's not true.
I heard you
That's
say
not
that.
true.
It is.
Order in the court.
Sorry, Judge.
Did you argue with Jabez Lemon on the night that he died?
No, sir. The last words we had was, I said to him, "Good night, Pop," and he said, "Good night, my son."
Thank you, John. There'll be nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Mr. Rainey, questions for the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Mr. Walsh, you say that Mr. Lemon was your best friend,
Yes, he was.
yet you called him obscene names.
Never.
Didn't you hear testimony to that effect?
I heard it, but it wasn't true.
So you never called him an old bastard?
No, sir.
That was a lie?
Or a mishear,
Would you get frustrated with Mr. Lemon?
only because I couldn't help him.
So his moaning, his complaining, his nastiness, they didn't bother you?
It bothered me that he was in tremendous pain and I couldn't help him.
Did you believe you'd get the pool hall when he died?
Yes, he told me I would.
So you had a motive to want him dead?
I never wanted Jabez dead. He was my best friend.
Lie.
Well, how
Mr. Rainey, proceed.
could your best friend have shot himself in the head and got no powder marks on his face?
I don't know. Maybe he held a cloth over the gun.
And how could he have done that and not gotten any powder marks or blood on himself?
Well, there wasn't a lot of blood.
There was blood on the curtains, and there was blood on the floor, and there was blood on the bed.
Well, then I don't know then.
How could your best friend have shot himself, clasped his hands over his hands across his chest, and turned himself around in a chair, facing his own cot?
I don't know. I don't know.
Mr. Walls, out of anger or mercy, did you take a revolver, shoot Mr. Walls in the head, close his eyes, clasp his hands, change the chair, and stage that scene?
No, sir, I did not. Mr. Lemon shot himself.
No more questions, Your Honor.
The defendant may step down. Mr. Stafford, do you have more witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor, we would like to call David Lewis, please.
Mr. Lewis will step forward and be sworn in. Mr. Lewis, Mr. Stafford, your witness?
Judge,
Your witness is not in the courtroom?
He was here. I don't know what happened. He knows he was going to be called. I don't know where he could be. He was.
You know it was your duty to make sure that your defense witnesses would be in court. You knew that.
Yes, I do. And I told him.
Well, I will ask for a short recess. We'll ask Squire Brayman. Squire Brayman, will you exit the courtroom and see if the witness is somewhere in the courthouse?
Nice control over your witnesses.
Mr. Lewis is a beer peddler from Carbondale who sold alcohol to Lemon's Pool Hall.
Ginger cake! Ginger cake! Get out of them flowers! I'll eat those flowers! I go back home to the wagon and I sugar fruit for you when I get back all the time. Gee, well,
Thank you, Squire Brayman. Will the witness please approach the bench at this time? You will remove your hat. You will remove your cigar.
okay. All right.
Were you
on the road here. I got work to do.
Were you-
deliveries to make.
Were you duly notified that you were to be a witness in this case?
Yes, I was. That's why I'm here right now.
Do you have a reason for your absence from the courtroom?
I was outside sharing a smoke with ginger cakes, my mule.
You left the courtroom in order to have a smoke. You needed a smoke.
That's correct.
It seems that people like you from that territory over there spends a lot of time hanging around pool rooms and hanging around with the rabble-rousers.
Rabble-rousers?
You were called by the defense to
That's all my
come
best
here.
friends.
This is a capital murder trial. If your testimony was not heard, it could mean that the defendant might be found guilty because your testimony was not heard. And
Well,
please,
maybe he should.
please remove that cigar from your mouth. I am not going to impose any punishment now for the disregard of the law, but I could have imposed a penalty of incarceration in the county jail, but you shall take the stand and be sworn in, please.
So where do you find that witness?
Judge, his hat.
Please remove your hat and your cigar from your hand. And your cigar.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God.
I do.
Please be seated. Mr. Lewis, you are trying my patience. You will remove your hat from the court. You will remove your hat from the Bible. Thank you. You will retain the decorum that's required in this courtroom. And You will please answer the questions posed to you. Mr. Safford, proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Lewis, do you remember the last time that Mr. Lemon placed a beer order with you?
Yes, I do.
And when was that?
That was on the Monday before this all went down. Actually, Mr. Walsh ordered the 2 cases of beer for Mr. Lemon.
And aside from that one night, though, Mr. Lemon always ordered his own beer, right? And he always ordered 2 cases of beer. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. I'd say maybe once in a while Mr. Walsh would, but usually Mr. Lemon.
But when Mr. Lemon did it, he always ordered 2 cases.
Oh, yeah. It's
That
always
was
2
his
cases.
usual.
Oh, yeah. He was a very steady customer, very loyal customer, and pretty good friend.
All right, now, did you deliver the order that week?
Well, I delivered it, but I guess sorta. I delivered it, but he didn't accept the whole order, I guess you could say.
Well, what
So
do you
yes
mean
and
by that?
no, but, well, I delivered it on Thursday,
Okay.
all right? And when I got there, Mr. Lemon answered the door, and he looked terrible. He looked like a train wreck. And he smelled that leg, stunk so bad, he had that look of pain in his eye. Oh, it was terrible. I was kind of shocked to see him going downhill that much. And he had bad breath, but that's beside the point. So anyway, I said, here's your 2 cases of beer, Mr. Lemon. And he leaned in close to me, and he kind of whispered like he didn't want nobody to hear. And he said, well, Dave, and he never called me Dave. It was always Mr. Lewis this,
Could you get
Mr.
to the
Lewis
point,
that.
please?
I'm getting to the point. He says, he goes, Dave, he says, I think I'm only going to take 1 case of beer because I don't think I'm going to live long enough to drink a 2nd case of beer. And I was kind of shocked. Yeah, I didn't know what to say, so I says, okay, here's your 1 case. And he said, here's your money I got in my wagon. Gave the whip a crack, and me and Ginger Cakes got on our way.
Now, you know, when people change their habits, there's always a reason. Now, he told you he was not going to live long enough to enjoy and use that 2nd case of beer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's why. Haven't you been listening? That's what I just said.
Okay, thank you. There'll be no more questions. You're a witness.
Mr. Haney,
Mr. Lewis, you get to Forest City often?
Yes, I do. It's one of my best areas. I probably make about, I don't know, 40, 50 deliveries a day. Or a week, I mean. About 10 a day.
And how many did you have that day?
Oh, I'd say probably about maybe 10, 9 or 10.
And yet you remember very well what Mr. Lemon told you that day.
Well, sure. Weren't you just listening to what I said? The man was contemplating his death. He was thinking about dying. There's only 2 things when a man thinks about dying that it could be. And one is either going to be he's contemplating suicide or murder.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further for this witness.
Mr. Lewis, your attitude has made me change my mind about the incarceration. Following completion of this trial, Squire Brayman will take you to the county jail and you will spend 24 hours contemplating the full response that you provided to this court.
Oh, what is...
Do you understand that?
I understand.
The
but what-
witness may step down.
Oh, I don't believe this. What am I supposed to do? I got work to do. I got deliveries to make. This is ridiculous. Nice hat, Cassie. I wish I had a fancy hat like that with all those feathery protrusions coming out of it. Maybe if I had a hat like that, the judge would let me wear it on my head.
Mr.
What do you
Lewis,
say, Judge? Should I get a real fancy hat like that?
Mr.
Give her this
Lewis,
one?
Mrs. Stanton happens to be a lady, you do not happen to be a gentleman. And I have changed my mind on the incarceration. It will be 48 hours. Squire Grayman will take you
Why
to
don't you
jail for 48 hours following the trial. Please be seated. No
What?
hat, no cigar.
Why don't you make it a month? I can use a vacation.
We'll do that. We will make sure that he spends a month in the Susquehanna County Jail. Please
Here.
be seated.
Have a cigar.
Don't try for a year. Mr. Safford. Mr. Safford, do you have another witness? Hopefully a better one than the last.
I hope so too.
I'm sure you do.
Yes, the defense would like to call Rebecca Jacobs, please.
Will Rebecca Jacobs approach the stand and be sworn in?
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yeah, I do.
The witness will be seated. Mrs. Jacobs, you seem to be halting in your gait. We appreciate very much you coming from Forest City. It's quite a trip over here. You know that a lot of people in Forest City don't even realize that Forest City is part of Susquehanna County. So we appreciate your coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Stafford?
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Jacobs, did you know Mr. Lemon?
Yeah, I knew Jabez.
And how would you describe his health?
Oh, it was not good. He could hardly move around.
Now, did Mr. Lemon ever say anything to you that might indicate that he was suicidal?
Oh, yeah. Long before he died, he said someday people will wake up and will find him dead in his room.
Now, Mr. Jacobs, did you conduct some type of experiments in the Higgins building yesterday?
Yeah, I did.
Can you please tell the court what the nature of those experiments were?
Well, me and Priscilla Nolan, we went in, to test to see if we could hear each other in the rooms.
Okay. Now, were you both in different rooms? Which rooms were you in? I don't understand.
I was in Mr. Lemon's room.
Okay.
And Priscilla, she went to Miss Stanton's room. And then I spoke in normal voice. And then I shouted. And then Priscilla and we switched places. She go to Mr. Lemon's room. I go to Miss Stanton's room. And she talked normal and then shout.
Now, why did you go to Mrs. Stanton's room?
Well, that is where she said she heard the argument.
Oh, that's where she heard Mr. Lemon and the defendant arguing on the night that Mr. Lemon died. Is that right? That was
Yeah.
Now, and Miss Stanton, she testified to that, didn't she?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Now, what were the results? What were the results of the tests that you conducted?
Well, Priscilla said she could not hear me, and I could not hear her when she was shouting.
So you couldn't really hear exactly what was being said, is that right?
Yeah, we could not hear at all.
Okay. Thank you. There'll be nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Mr. Rainey, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Jacobs, how loud did you guys shout while you were in those rooms?
I shouted very loud.
And were the apartment doors open or closed?
They were closed,
How about the windows?
closed.
Were you in Mr. Lemon's apartment the night before he died?
None.
Then how do you know the condition of the windows and the doors?
It's middle of January. Windows closed, cold. Middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, people sleeping, doors closed. I hope.
So, you really have no idea if the conditions were the same, do you?
Nine.
But you don't know for sure, do you?
Nine.
And do you know about your voices? Would they be the same since you're women?
Ich weiß nicht. I do not know.
How about your hearing?
My hearing is very good.
How long have you known Mr. Walls?
Excuse me, 3 years.
Would you consider him a friend?
Oh yes, just good friends.
Nothing more.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. The witness may step down. Mr. Safford, another witness.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Priscilla Nolan, please.
The witness will come forward and be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
The witness will be seated.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Nolan, did you hear the previous testimony from Ms. Jacobs?
Yes, I did.
Regarding the hearing experiments that were done in the building where Mr. Lemon died?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you conduct those experiments with Mrs. Jacobs?
Oh, yes.
Now, would you corroborate Mrs. Jacobs' testimony?
Yes, when Rebecca was in Mr. Lemon's room, I was in Miss Stanton's room. I could not hear her, even when she shouted. When we switched places, it was the same thing. She could not hear me, and I shouted pretty loud.
Well, thank you. There'll be nothing else.
Thank you, Mr. Safford. Mr. Rainey, do you wish to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Mrs. Nolan, would you agree with Ms. Jacobs that the conditions, you had no idea what the conditions were the night that this all happened?
No, but she was probably right. Everything would have been closed.
Are you good friends with the defendant as well?
No, I don't know Jack Walsh very well at all.
So why would you have gone there?
I would go to the pool hall to fetch my husband because he was staying there too late. And usually on a payday.
Did your husband know Mr. Walsh?
Yes, he knew Jack Walsh, but he knew Jabez Lemon a lot better.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. The witness may step down. Mr. Safford, another witness?
Your Honor, the defense and the Commonwealth have a stipulation, please.
Proceed.
The defense stipulates that we can produce 13 more witnesses that are prepared to take the stand and testify that Mr. Walsh is a good citizen with a peaceful and nonviolent nature.
Mr. Rainey?
So stipulated, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the defense rests.
Thank you very well, Mr. Safford. Mr. Safford, are you prepared to make a closing statement?
Yes, Your Honor, we are.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a very sad and tragic case. And the tragedy of Mr. Lemon's death is made even more tragic by the fact that an innocent man, Jack Walsh, is on trial for a crime he did not commit, a crime that actually did not happen. Mr. Lemon was not murdered on January the 17th. Mr. Lemon had committed suicide. And my God, can anybody blame that man? Imagine the pain he suffered. Bad enough he couldn't breathe, but that leg of his sounds absolutely horrendous. It was so bad, and Jack testified. At times, the infection, his leg would swell and can be infested with maggots. But Jack Walsh, being the friend that he was, took it upon himself to help Jabez, to do everything he could for him. But nothing that Jack could do for Jabez could help to ease his pain. Jabez Lemon wanted to die. He told numerous people he wanted to die. And he did die, but by his own hand. On that night, he sat down in his chair, the chair that he had to sleep in, a chair that was facing his cot, and he shot himself in the head. There wasn't room for anyone to stand between the cot and the chair. It was impossible, and you heard that testimony from the witness stand. Now, there's a few things that don't sit quite right with me. A man of habit. Jabez Lemon returned a case of beer because he said he wouldn't be here long enough and he wouldn't need it. He wouldn't belong in here long enough to enjoy it. Habits don't change that, just like that. Also, why would Jack Walsh bother to fix a crutch for a man that he planned on killing and take the time to do that? Now, you also heard about the testimony from the absence of the gunpowder and blood. But don't forget that Mr. Lemon's death was at first believed to be a suicide, right from the beginning. People were in and out of that room. The body was manhandled. Things got disturbed. Nobody bothered to preserve any evidence. And the room was never treated as anything other than a suicide. No one believed there was a crime because there wasn't. Please don't compound this tragedy with another. Don't convict an innocent and peaceful man for a crime he did not commit. You must find Jack Walsh not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Is there any closing statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have to agree with Mr. Stafford on one point. This is a sad and tragic case. It's always tragic when one man takes another's life. It's more tragic when a friend betrays another. And that's what happened in this case. John Walsh betrayed Jabez Lemon. He was supposed to be Mr. Lemon's caretaker and best friend. Jabez Lemon trusted Walsh, and John Walsh betrayed that trust by killing him. Mr. Lemon did not commit suicide. While it's true that he suffered greatly and told many people he wanted to die, he never acted on those wishes. How many of us in the throes of an illness or an injury have said the same thing? We may have said it at the time, but the will to live is an incredibly powerful force, so we do not act on it. You heard evidence from the witness stand that proves Mr. Lemon didn't commit suicide. You heard the testimony of Dr. Grander. You can't shoot yourself in the head and not get powder marks on your face and on your hand. The shot that killed Jabez Lemon was fired from at least 10 feet away. If you hold your hand out and try to shoot yourself, your hand's no more than 2 feet away. He could not have shot himself. You can't shoot yourself in the head, splatter blood all over the cartons, the carpet, and the gun, and not get blood on your hands. Yet that was the scene in Mr. Lemon's room. The chair facing the cot, easily staged. You know, I don't know why Mr. Lemon refused that case of beer, but I do know that he was not planning to kill himself on the early morning hours of January 17th. You heard proof of that from the witness stand from Mrs. Higgins. There was bad blood between Mr. Lemon and Mrs. Higgins. They were embroiled in a lawsuit, but yet he chose to pay her $12 for the rent. He did that because he planned to live there. He would not pay her $12 if he thought he was going to be dead tomorrow. Lemon paid Higgins because he thought he had to do it, because he believes he'd be living in those quarters for at least another month. The prosecution believes that three things figured in the death of Jabez Lemon: anger, greed, and probably pity. Lemon had become a burden to Mr. Walls, and Walls wanted to inherit the pool hall. But I also believe Walls wanted to end Mr. Lemon's suffering, and I think we can all understand that. We can feel sorry for both men. But we are a nation of laws, and no one has the right to play God. You cannot take a man's life because you believe he'd be better out dead. Jabez Lemon had a right to live until his master called him home. Jack Walls took that right away. He murdered Jabez Lemon, and whether he did it out of greed, anger, or mercy does not matter. He broke the law. He deserves to be punished. He is guilty, and I'm asking you to find him so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. That concludes the testimony in the case of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus John Jack Waltz. The case is now in your hands. If you believe from the evidence taken from that witness stand that Mr. Waltz on the morning of January 17th, 1897, did willfully and deliberately shoot Mr. Lemon, causing his death, then you must return a verdict of guilty. If, on the other hand, you believe that Mr. Lemon, in a depressed state of mind, willfully and deliberately took his own life, then your verdict should be one of not guilty. I will leave you to deliberate your verdict. We will give you, the jurors, a few moments to determine your decision, innocent or guilty. We will first have the prisoner stand and face the jury. Those who feel the vote should be innocent, please stand. Please be seated.
Going home. Love you guys.
Those who feel that he is guilty, please stand. Please be seated. Mr. Waltz, a jury of your peers has found you innocent, and you are now free to leave and hopefully become a valued member of the Forest City business community. Our director, Tammy O'Reilly, will now tell you the results of the case as it took place in 1897.
So you found him innocent. The original jury did not. But they found him guilty of only second-degree murder, not first, which leads me to believe that they thought it was mercy killing, not a greed killing. That's what I would think. Judge Cyril also, I think, had doubts because he sentenced him to only 9 years in prison. So while Waltz languished in Eastern State Penitentiary, Attorney Safford, who strongly believed in his client's innocence, he worked diligently on the appeals. He didn't abandon Waltz, and neither did the people of Forest City. They were outraged by the verdict. So between Waltz and the people of Forest City, they made such a stink that eventually it landed on Governor William Stone's desk. And on January 1st, 1902, at Stone's recommendation, the parole board pardoned Jack Waltz, and he was released from prison after serving 4 years of his 9-year sentence. Now, I was not able to determine whatever became of him. I do know that one of his 2 children, a daughter, sat with him at the defense table through the entire trial. And I think maybe he went with her. She was from New England. I think maybe he went with her when he was released from prison. Lemon, Jack Lemon, or Jabez Lemon, is buried here in Forest City. So I'd also just like to say, before everyone leaves, that I really love doing this, and I am so lucky and so thankful to have so many talented people who are really... This community's lucky to have them, and so I would love to introduce them. Our judge, John Green. His clerk, Julianne Doyle. Prosecutor Amy, Bob Wirtz. Attorney Safford, Dave Homasak. Our defendant, Joe Malinowski. Mrs. Higgins, Ms. Higgins, no, you're a Mrs. You're a Roseanne Spiegel. Miss Stevens, Barb House. Miss Dr. Grander, Jerry Cervenka. His wife, Ann Cervenka. David Lewis, Matt Homesack. Rebecca Jacobs, Barb Klobuchar. Priscilla Nolan, Peggy Works. And I saved our youngest cast members for last because I'm so grateful to these boys. It is so hard to get young people to participate in anything. And let me tell you, they went above and beyond. So we have Squire Brandon Nunn, and Colin Bailey. I hope you enjoyed the show.
There is one more piece of business before the court. That piece of business is Squire Brayman will take Mr. Lewis to the Susquehanna County Jail as part of a 1-month sentence. Court is adjourned.